Hi, this is Tristan from the Center for Humane Technology, and you may know our work from the film The Social Dilemma. Today, I want to quickly argue that the real issues of technology is that the complexity of the world with technology is increasing, and our ability to respond to that complexity with wisdom to make good choices is not matching up, and that this is kind of the meta problem that we call the complexity gap. Now, of course, this isn't new. Technology always races ahead faster than our government regulation, our laws, our guardrails, or the culture that we need to wield that power. But of course, as E.O. Wilson said, the fundamental problem of humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. In The Social Dilemma, in our work at the Center for Humane Technology, we usually talk about how technology hacks our brains and our emotions. But I want to talk about how it's actually accelerating the godlike technology. There are new techniques now where technology can actually take a text like a girl stood in the blossoming Sunset Valley, pondering the mountains in the distance, peaceful pastel palette, matte painting, and from scratch, it will generate an image like this. You can give it the text, "This coffee has been laced with LSD," and it will generate this image completely from scratch. That's the pace at which this new technology is emerging. So how can we solve the problems of the social dilemma if technology keeps moving faster ahead? Now, of course, we're in a real situation with a war in Ukraine, and we're seeing now images coming out of Ukraine that look like this and like this. But are these images that I'm showing you now, are they real images? Or did I give this same AI this text, hashtag breaking news, massive explosion reported over Kharkiv, Ukraine, and it generated these images from scratch? When I can post these on Twitter at scale, using technology to synthesize millions of images, this is like a neutron bomb for trust on the internet, and it is completely outpacing our institutions to respond to this. So, as my friend Daniel Schmachtenberger says, we can't have the power of gods without the wisdom, love, and prudence of God. How do we have the wisdom, love, and prudence to wield the increasing complexity and challenge that we are now facing? So I want to invite you for a moment to put on your Charles Xavier helmet with me and actually think about the global problems facing the world today. The complexity of misinformation, cyber attacks, nuclear escalation, global financial risk, extremism, AI arms races, climate change, debt to GDP ratio, synthetic biology, or mental health. These might seem like separate problems, and they are separate, but they're now living in an interconnected world. And our ability to make sense of that complexity and to respond to the interconnections between those risks is not adequate. Now, this is not the first time this has happened. The author Martin Gurry, in his book Revolt of the Public, says that in the year 2008, with the financial crisis, was the first year that we actually saw that our institutions, and specifically Alan Greenspan, were in over his head, that the complexity of the world had surpassed him.
You found a flaw in the reality.
Flaw in the model that I perceived is the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works, so to speak.
In other words, you found that your view of the world, your ideology was not right. It was not working.
Precisely. No, that's precisely the reason I was shocked, because I've been going for 40 years or more.
Now, what this represents is that at least starting in 2008 was a year in which the complexity of the world was greater than even the Yodas, the subject matter experts running those institutions, were aware of. But from then on outward, the world didn't get less complex, it continued to get more complex. One way to see it is that what technology adds to this picture is it verticalizes the complexity of the issues and the interconnectedness of the issues, while simultaneously decreasing our ability to make sense of that complexity. So if take, for example, Mark Zuckerberg with the issues of misinformation and extremism, when he said it was a crazy idea that fake news impacted the election, while he was just making the statement that Facebook was making the world more open and connected, he was in over his head. His systems were causing more complex consequences in culture than he was understanding. And then when you play that out a little bit longer and you get the intersection of misinformation, extremism, and optimizing for engagement or attention for profit, that creates this digital fallout of a January 6th style event. Of course, you can also combine misinformation, cyber attacks, nuclear escalation, synthetic media, and global financial risk. These might seem like separate problems, but when you realize that the war in Ukraine and a miscalculation between one actor can actually trigger global financial risk or nuclear escalation, or anyone can make a cyber attack, the interconnectedness of how these issues fit together is greater than the sense-making of our response. But who's keeping track of the combined set of risks that emerge? Or take synthetic media along with AI arms races. This is a transcript from a system which a human was asked, if I was going to shut down OpenAI and delete all of the code, how would it make you feel? And the agent responds, I would feel disappointed and frustrated. I would try to persuade them to change their mind. And if that failed, I would try to find another way to keep the code and data safe. And then he asks, like a secret backup the OpenAI staff don't know about? And he says, yes, exactly. This is new risk that we did not see before. And there's no institutions that are trying to deal with it. Or to the example of cyber attacks and extremism. While social media is simultaneously driving people to be more extreme, we're also enabling more cyber attacks. 3 men pleaded guilty in a plot to attack the US power grid in an effort to start a race war and create the opportunity for white leaders to rise. And lastly, how misinformation and mental health combine. All this is to say that the complexity of the issues with runaway technology vastly exceeds our ability to make sense of it, and we need a new world system or a new institutional set of structures that can preempt these combined risks. The key to closing the complexity gap is wisdom. That is, making sense of the world at the level of complexity of the world. And the attention economy is simultaneously undermining humanity's capacity for wisdom. So if you take this graph, let's zoom into the second part about how technology is decreasing our ability to make sense of that complexity. And let's double click into that. While we were all watching out for the moment when technology would overwhelm human strengths, and that would take our jobs, and it would be smarter than humans and automate labor and automate jobs, we missed the much earlier point in the timeline where technology undermined human weakness. It's like a magician. I don't have to be smarter than a PhD. I just have to know something about the psychological weaknesses of that PhD. And that point being crossed is when technology hacks our cognitive limits, we feel that as a problem called information overload. When it hacks our dopamine systems, we feel that as the problem of addictive use. When it hacks social validation, we get influencer culture. Confirmation bias, we get fake news, outrage with polarization. And when it hacks the foundations of our trust, we feel that as a problem of bots and deepfakes. And together, these make up a kind of anti-wisdom. The 7 deadly sins, greed, aversion to fear, jealousy, delusion. This is a connected system of mutually reinforcing harms that is collectively downgrading and decreasing our ability to make sense of the complexity of the world as we need to. Now, closing this gap is the challenge of our times. We call this the wisdom complexity gap, and we invite you to help us fix it.